What is the murder capital of New England? Which New England city is the roughest when it comes to murder count? You often hear debates on which city is worse in New England between Hartford, Connecticut, New Haven, Providence, Rhode Island, Boston, Massachusetts, Lowell, etc. Now, this video is not made to glorify homicide, violence, or brag about it. It's not meant to discourage these cities or states either. Every city has great parts and rough parts to it. This is simply a statistical experiment for fellow city stat nerds like myself. Now, there are a number of ways to compare stats. You can look at overall crime statistics, including violent and non-violent crimes, so murders, but also the number of reported thefts, rape, and every other kind of incident that goes into the crime database. You can look at murder ratio, or you can look at murder count, and the list goes on. It also depends on how you compare these stats to population. Population is important, but depending on how you compare the data to it, it can really skew things sometimes. Murder rate, or ratio, for example, is found by taking the total number of murders in the city for an entire year and dividing them by the total population of that city. You then multiply that number by 100,000. You'll find most stats are listed as per 100,000 people, and not by the actual population of the city. Now, this formula can make a lot of sense and can be very helpful for cleaning stats up in most cases, but in some cases it can also paint an inaccurate picture. For example, say you have a small town of only 6,000 people where murder never ever happens, but 1 year in a freak incident, somebody snaps and murders their spouse and their spouse's lover. You have 2 murders in that town for that year. 2 divided by 6,000 gives you 0.00033. Multiply that by 100,000 people and you have a murder ratio or a murder rate of 0.33 for that year. Now, say you have a city of 100,000 people that regularly sees 20 murders every single year. That ratio is only going to be 0.20. If you're comparing the city with this town in that one specific year, the small town is actually going to boast a higher murder ratio than the city will, on paper, and be deemed more dangerous. But in reality, we know that's not true. You have a much higher chance of being murdered in the city regularly. So that's an example of how population and stats can kind of blur a picture depending on what you're trying to look for. So in this video, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. We're going to focus only on non-major cities. This leaves us with cities that all have populations of more than 100,000 people and less than 200,000 people. So the playing field is extremely even in population. We will also be going by the highest murder counts, not ratios. And to narrow it down further, we're going to only select one winner from each state. Now, Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire are all incredibly safe states, statistically, with none of their cities breaking double digits in homicide counts on a yearly basis, which is a good thing. Because of this, they're excluded from this list. So basically, which city is the highest murder count in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and which of these 3 states reigns supreme? We'll look at the highest murder count in a single year, and then the highest murder count in a 10-year span to see which city is more consistently dangerous. So before we dive in, technically, the winner for the highest amount of homicides in New England is Boston, Massachusetts. But we're not counting Boston in this video because it's a major city with well over 500,000 people living in it. And when compared to its massive population, it's actually a much safer city than many New England cities are. Its highest homicide count in a single year was 75 murders in 2006, and many years being significantly less than that. Boston is actually one of the safer major cities in the entire United States. For comparison, Baltimore is very similar in size to Boston and is also a major city, and its worst year in recent history was 348 murders in a single year compared to Boston's 75. Statistically, you will be much safer in Boston than in the following cities we're about to name. So removing Boston, all of the following cities have populations between 125,000 and 189,000 at the time of this video, 2023. In third place, and the safest on our list, is Providence, Rhode Island, with a population of 189,000 people at the time of this video. Providence is actually the biggest city in all of New England besides Boston. Its highest homicide count in 1 year was 23 murders in 2009. Fortunately, This was a rare year for Providence, with most years counting 11 to 13 homicides on average. Providence's 10-year homicide count from 2009 to 2019 is 145 total homicides. Providence not only has the least amount of homicides in a 10-year span out of all the biggest and most dangerous New England cities, it does so while sporting the largest population as well. In second place, with the second highest homicide count in New England, is Springfield, Massachusetts, with a population of 154,000 people. Its highest year was 22 murders in 2013. Now, this is one less than Providence's highest year, but while Providence's was a fluke year, unfortunately, 22 is closer to the norm for Springfield, with a couple of other years also breaking 20, and most years ranging in the high teens. Springfield's 10-year homicide count from 09 to 19 is 181 murders, compared to Providence's 145, while having 35,000 less people than Providence. Finally, in first place with the highest consistent murder count in all of New England is Hartford, Connecticut. 120,000 people living in it at the time of this video. Now, you may have seen headlines about New Haven being the most dangerous, and interestingly enough, New Haven does actually have the highest homicide count in a single year in all of Massachusetts for non-major cities, with 34 homicides in 2011. But, like Providence, that was an extremely unusual year, with most of New Haven's years counting 10 to 12 homicides, just like Providence. Of course, New Haven's population is only 135,000, which is 54,000 less than Providence, still making it more dangerous pound for pound than Providence. Hartford's highest year is 33 homicides in 2009, which is only one less than New Haven, but most of its years are very similar. In fact, only 2 out of 10 years were under 20 murders, with 4 out of 10 years breaking 30 homicides or more in a single year. This gives Hartford, Connecticut a 10-year count of 268 homicides from 2009 to 2019. For comparison, New Haven's 10-year count was 160, while being a slightly bigger city. In fact, if you want to compare it to Boston, Boston is almost 5 times larger than Hartford, but its 10-year murder count is only twice as big, meaning you can fit 5 Hartfords inside of Boston, yet that little city carries half of Boston's entire murder count over the course of a decade. So there you have it. When it comes to straight up homicide counts, New Haven holds the record for the most in a single year, but Hartford boasts the most year to year, with its highest day being only one shy of New Haven's. Connecticut owns the highest pound-for-pound homicide count in New England, followed by Massachusetts and then Rhode Island. Of course, if we let Boston back into this club, then Massachusetts wins on an overall count, just not a pound-for-pound count. Hope you found these stats interesting. Hope to hear from you below.